In war, you fight to stay alive. But in this war, staying dead is the real challenge. Welcome to 68, an alternative history nightmare where CIA spooks, rogue scientists, and undead soldiers clash in the blood-soaked jungles of Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War may officially be over, but people are going missing, and someone's been training monsters for reasons no one can explain. But if anyone can get to the bottom of it all, it's Agent Declan Rule, and this time it's personal for him. And as the madness spreads, we'll also cross paths with a certain familiar gas mask. Oh yes, all that and more will be found in today's epic video. Hey guys, I'm your host Juan, and today we'll be continuing on in the world of 68 with 68 Rule of War. Yeah, this was a 4-issue miniseries published by Image Comics in 2014. It was written by Mark Kidwell, with art by Jeff Zornow and colors by Fotos. But not just Rule of War today. No, we're also covering the 68 Jungle Gym Guts and Glory one-shot that came out a year later and which ties into the story. So yeah, that's pretty exciting. Without further ado, let's get right into it. But before we do so, make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you can stay in the loop with all the latest videos. Also consider signing up for my YouTube membership program. Members were able to watch a preview of this video early, and certain tiers have special bonus content. But enough with all that, let's see what's cooking. Our story opens with a flashback on Christmas Day, 1967 in Cambodia. We see a twitchy man in a lab coat descend into an underground pit cage, where another straight-jacketed figure is moaning, obscured in the shadowed corner. The scientist sneers at the shackled man and gleefully informs him that he's just undergone an intense series of operations. The prisoner desperately tries to speak, but his choked words are slurred and barely coherent. The scientist chuckles and briefs the poor man that he's going to be soon deployed against the American military by the North Vietnamese communists in an operation planned to coincide with the Vietnamese Tet holiday in 1 month's time. And so the cold open reveal is that the prisoner is a young man named Lieutenant Rule, and he's been horrifically disfigured. And he has heavy scarring and dozens of wires surgically inserted into his brain and his body. From there, we jump to the present day, nearly 2 months later, on February 19th, 1968. It has been about 6 days since the zombie apocalypse broke out deep in the jungles of Vietnam, and right now we see a familiar face creeping through the tall grass of Cambodia. It's the sunglass-wearing CIA Special Agent, Declan Rule, accompanied by the fierce military combat dog, Nero, who's currently tearing into some guy who's just cooking some lunch. You see, the guy is a part of a contingent of the Viet Cong, who must be managing the Ho Chi Minh Trail or something. Anyway, as Agent Rule dispatches of them, he thinks about the U.S. history in Southeast Asia, the decades-old roots and prelude that eventually culminated in boots on the ground. And in Rule's eyes, it all worked well enough. That is, until the Tet Offensive and the resulting backlash back at home, which blew everything up and caused things to spiral way out of control. And now Rule's son is dead, and he's hunting the man responsible. Dr. Tan Morneau, the insane and radical neurosurgeon who conducts gross and unethical human experiments, the same man Agent Rule set off in pursuit of at the end of Volume 1, and the very same scientist from the cold opening. From there, we make a chaotic transition over to Tan Son Airport in Saigon, where we return to Private Quen Yam and his friends, right where we left them, desperately searching for a functioning plane so they can escape Vietnam. But as you can see, it's no easy task. No, they're fighting for their lives out here on the runways. The starving undead even nearly get their rotting hands on Nurse Alice, but luckily her lover boy Yam is there ready to slam a heavy pickaxe into a zombie's skull. Anyway, Watson's still there too, still on crutches. He remarks that it's unexpected that a black man and an Asian guy would ever be standing side by side, so far away from home in a third world country. But Yam simply replies that it's not so surprising. They're Americans, he says, and they're too stubborn to die. And as that is going on, the self-proclaimed Indian chiefs, Samson and Hickok, they locate a World War II era aircraft. And this is great cause for excitement, because despite the bomber being on the older side of things and kept in storage for years, it seems to be in pristine condition, and they may have just found their ticket out. So Hickok mans the controls, and a loud sputtering sound is heard, much to the exhausted glee of Yam, Alice, and Watson. But then they hear another sound that stops them dead in their tracks. It's a high-pitched voice, crying out for help. And so we are introduced, literally now for the first time, two new characters. Alice already knows. The woman's name is Maggie, I guess, and she's trying to help another man out of the makeshift tunnel. Alice sprints out to them, moving farther away from the plane they all need to get onto pronto. But Yam refuses to abandon the girl he loves, so he grabs a weapon and runs over to her. And all in good time, too, because this Maggie chick almost gets eaten alive by a zombie before our hero blows its head off in one clean shot. Yam then tells Alice they gotta move, like right now, and she hastily introduces him both to Maggie and to the other guy, a corpsman named Jim. But you don't gotta remember that shit, though, because Jim immediately gets his shit rocked by 8 bullets that rip through his body. So yeah, Jim is dead, and our heroes try to take cover as best they can, as it seemingly begins raining lead. And frankly, things are looking pretty dire. And it seems like it may finally be the end of the road for them. However, our protagonists' prayers for reprieve are answered in the form of Hickok, who fires on all cylinders from the bomber plane, literally tearing the Kong apart. Yam immediately takes advantage of the diversion, and he starts dragging Alice to the aircraft. However, she starts resisting and calling out for Jim to come join them. So Yam pimp slaps her across the face, and then they, make out. Anyway, everyone gets on board, and they jet off in a dramatic takeoff. But, ominously, as they depart, we see that their fuel tank got struck by a bullet. And on that dour note, we return to Agent Rule, who is with Nero, reminiscing about his deceased son, Nathan Rule. Apparently, the boy was a West Point-educated infantry officer who rejected his father's pleas to take a safe office job he had procured for him with his connections. But no, Nathan proudly told Agent Rule that he's going to Vietnam with everyone else, because there were people counting on him, and he thought he could do some real good there. Agent Rule was not pleased to hear this at all, and he angrily told his son that this is not a game, and that if he gets in trouble over there, he's not going to be able to help him. And to this, Nathan shouted back that he's his own man, with his own life, and that he wanted absolutely nothing with his father, or with his shady CIA business. And, well, unfortunately, that was the last ever conversation between the two. 6 months or so later, Agent Rule was contacted by his estranged ex-wife, a woman who refused to even be in the same room as him. She was frantic because Nathan wrote frequently to her. That is, until one day, he suddenly stopped and went completely dark. You see, Nathan had gone missing in action in Vietnam. Eventually, the rest of his patrol unit was found, all of them long since dead, but Nathan's body wasn't among them. However, weeks later, his deceased corpse was actually recovered hundreds of miles away in the city of Hue, the site that became the bloodiest and most protracted battlefield during the Tet Offensive. And, disturbingly, there were credible witness reports indicating that Nathan Rule was fighting on the side of the enemy, and that most unbelievably, the soldier was seen leaping a 10-foot barricade before he blew himself up next to a bunch of Americans. Obviously, Agent Rule had no idea what to make of this, and he started drinking so he didn't have to confront the idea that his own son was a traitor. And that's the way things were, until one day his case officer dropped a file on his desk containing intel on the mad Dr. Zornow. And ever since then, our little spook has been on the hunt. I'm sure you of course recall that his quest eventually led him to go undercover and come to Southeast Asia, and you know how he eventually ended up at Firebase Ares and all that. But now he's back in Cambodia, and things have really come full circle in a way, because right now he's staring at what's left of that activist film set he abandoned. Yeah, if you recall, everyone got eaten, including the famous bombshell actress, whose decaying body is now rotting underneath the humid sun. But, believe it or not, there was actually one survivor of this massacre. That pervy camera guy who kept zooming in on the actress's breasts. You remember him, right? Yeah, I guess he's been hiding in the tree for the last week or so. His name is Norman Sellers, by the way. Anyway, Rule and Sellers spot each other, and the cameraman, with wide eyes, silently gestures at the brush, where a ghoulish zombie has just stumbled out of. But there's something different about this one. Something very different. Horrifically, this undead monster has a bevy of cables and wires jammed into its body, and several more embedded into its skull, along with a scrappy metal plate covering. Additionally, the zombie's lower abdomen has been dug out, and a battery has been stuffed in there. Also, the creature's hands have been cut off and replaced with these rusty metal implantations, crudely shaped like a sword and a mace. In other words, he basically looks like a cross between a potato battery and a Roomba. Well, a remote-controlled Roomba, maybe. Because, as you can see, the creep appears to be being piloted by a Viet Cong guy with a transmitter. The man releases 2 prisoners he's carrying, and he orders them to run. The militant then cranks up his control dial, and the zombie starts mechanically jerking around. And then, the thing suddenly snaps and goes totally berserk, brutally filleting one of the prisoners in a rapid fury. Oh yes, as you can see, this is a whole new level of undead savagery. The beast decapitates the poor guy, and it plays around with his intestines. But the Viet Cong man isn't done yet. He cranks up the dial even further, and then the zombie leaps a full foot into the air and pounces on the other shrieking prisoner. Agent Rule is shocked beyond words. Someone has been turning zombies into cyborg drones, stimulated and enhanced by electrical shocks. And there's really only one sick man who could be behind this, the depraved Dr. Zornow. But whatever the case, the Viet Cong find this entire display incredibly funny, and they are laughing up a storm and having a good old time, until Agent Rule starts shooting their faces off in disgust. Nero helps too, tearing an enemy's neck and ragdolling him around, and everything seems to be going fine enough, until Sellers suddenly leaps down from the tree and sprints at Rule, shouting at him to turn around. It's the Frankenstein zombie lunging full speed at the agent, And it's about to get the jump on him too, but Sellers steps in and smacks the monstrosity across the face. Rule doesn't waste the opportunity, tackling the zombie and driving a knife into it again and again. Our hero rips into the circuitry until the zombie starts spasming and sparks fly out of its implants. Agent Rule shouts to take cover as the cyborg violently twitches as smoke billows out from its wires, seconds before it bursts apart in a massive explosion. Meanwhile, as that is happening, over the skies of Vietnam, the American bomber is gracefully soaring through the air. But despite its serene external appearance, inside, things are anything but calm. Right now, the pilots, Samson and Hickok, are in a heated argument about the plane's rapid fuel loss. Private Yam pops his head into the cockpit and asks what's going on, and they tell him that their gas tanks must have been hit, and one way or another, this aircraft's going down. Yam tenses up, but Hickok confidently assures him that it's going to be okay, for 2 reasons. Firstly, he knows that there are Army airstrips nearby where they can stop, repair the tanks, and refuel. And secondly, he has noticed random jet trails up there in the skies with them. And remember, the war is over, and all the bases should be closed, which then suggests that there may be a functioning aircraft carrier somewhere nearby that they can hopefully hitch a ride on. Yam quickly communicates this info to the rest of the crew, but it does little to lighten the mood. The Maggie chick has been basically non-responsive the entire time, and everyone else is incredibly pessimistic. Alice quietly asks Yam where they're even going to go at this point. As far as they know, the Undead have already likely taken over the rest of the planet at this point. So great, maybe they'll get out of Vietnam, but does it really matter if everywhere else is practically the same? Yam looks down and mumbles something about the possible aircraft carrier nearby, but Watson snaps at him, asking how the hell they'll ever find its location amidst the entire ocean. They don't even know for sure if they'll be able to repair the plane they're on, and even if they manage to, the simple fact of the matter is that the model has too limited a range to fly very far out over the ocean before needing to stop and refuel. So yeah, from a realistic and long-term point of view, things are looking pretty bleak. And all Yam can really say in response is that they have to at least try anyway. But as the bomber descends onto the dilapidated airstrip, we see that the place is crawling with the zombies. But not only that, from the edges of the jungle peers a pair of mysterious eyes, carefully watching everything go on from afar. From there, we jump 28 miles eastward to a new location. There, we see an obscured figure slowly raise their hand out in front of a hungry zombie's face. Naturally, it aggressively chomps out at the tasty flesh, but the hand pulls back fast enough, and the figure shrieks that the zombie is useless, and they pull out a gun and shoot it in the face point blank. The stranger then waves their hand in front of another zombie with a star painted on its face. But the zombie turns its head and refuses to bite, seemingly because it just saw its brethren be killed. But regardless, this entire affair is being observed by a man through binoculars in a tree. It's Chief Petty Officer Tremaine, the skipper from 68 Scars, who was seriously injured and left behind in the jungle. Yeah, apparently he survived, and he's been following a familiar face from a distance. Well, that may not be so technically correct. Chief Tremaine certainly recognizes the man, but he definitely doesn't know the face. It's First Class Kearney, who was just an annoying butterbar the last time the chief saw him, but who now is self-evidently psychotic and unstable. That's right. Kearney now goes by Warface, a name he attained after killing a pair of Navy SEALs and wearing one of their faces as a mask like Leatherface. The chief watches in terror as Kearney continues on with the next stage of his sick game. The madman coats his fingers in fresh blood, and he shakes them in front of another zombie. The creature stares blankly ahead without even the hint of a stir, pleasing Kearney and prompting him to toss the zombie a severed human hand to snack on as a reward. Oh yes, your intuition is correct, dear viewer. Kearney is straight up training the undead like they're dogs, and he has already amassed over a dozen of these smart zombies that won't bite him when he comes near. Chief Tremaine is thoroughly terrified by this, but what Warface does next turns his blood cold. The skin-wearing sadist slowly turns and locks his unblinking eyes with the chief's hiding spot. From behind a rotting slab of another man's skin, Kearney smacks his lips and tells the chief to come down and join him. The skipper shudders and replies that the war is over, and he cautiously raises his rifle at Kearney. But Warface is unfazed. In a jarring and erratic voice, Kearney insists that they shouldn't be fighting each other, and that his new army here could use an experienced veteran like the chief. But Tremaine isn't having it, and he tells Kearney to cut the shit. He knows he murdered those Navy SEALs, and that makes him no better than the Viet Cong. But nevertheless, the chief opts not to kill Kearney because, quote, it'd be like killing a sick dog, and this jungle hell is closer to what he deserves. And with that, Tremaine recedes back into the shadows, vowing that he will shoot the psycho if he ever sees him again. Kearney shakes with rage and screeches that the chief's a pussy, and the next time they meet, he'll see how the war really ends. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, there ain't no reason why he should have left this clown alive. Whatever. Anyway, we return to Cambodia now, where Sellers is roaming around the wreckage, looking for supplies. I guess they all survived the explosion, but Agent Rule has left Nero and some weapons with Sellers before he amicably parted ways to continue his mission solo. And so we see the agent in question, currently busy starting a bonfire. Truthfully, he didn't really want to leave Nero behind, but he knows this next phase of his plan is going to require subtlety, and he doesn't want the dog to get hurt. Plus, in his eyes, Sellers has more than proved himself as a survivor, and he deserves all the help he can get. But regardless, we finally see the object of Rule's plan here. You see, he ignited the fire to purposely draw attention to himself, and he's only acting aloof right now because he wants to get captured. And, well, for better or worse, his wish has just been granted. From there, we make a hard pivot to briefly reconnect with Private Yam's parents, Joe and Faye, who are in America. As you may recall, the last time we saw them, they had decided to ditch the refugee camp on Staten Island. So yeah, they and another couple are pretty much just sailing around on a boat belonging to a guy named Grandy. They see, among other things, the aftermath of the ongoing bridge battle at the end of 68 Scars. And it looks like the US military kind of dominated. However, now men in hazmat suits are busy fishing out the zombie carcasses, which are polluting the water. Anyway, the crew keeps on sailing for hours and hours, and we catch these little glimpses of the mood of the nation outside of New York City. For example, all across the New Jersey shoreline are signs declaring that they won't take any refugees, and that all trespassers will be shot on sight. But where are Joe and Faye even going, you might be asking? Hey, that's a pretty good question. Well, you see, Grandy, the guy with the ponytail here, well, he's taking them to a sparsely populated location he knows about near New Jersey. And to make a long matter short, the party eventually arrives at the right place, which Grandy identifies as Pitt Island. He explains that it's totally isolated and only accessible via boat. Apparently, the islands run kind of like a commune. If you want to eat, you contribute. And at the top of it sits its matriarch, a former child acting star named Ardelia Brower, who lives in this decrepit estate that honestly kind of looks like Luigi's Mansion. But in this case, appearances are not deceiving, because there's definitely something very dark and wicked going on here. For starters, we see that Ardelia is certainly not a little girl anymore. No, with pursed lips, she watches the boat slowly arrive at the island. In a bitter voice, the washed-up former actress informs someone behind her that drug dealer, Grandy, has just brought them more people. So she turns around and tells the figure to get back to work. And in response, a deep and slow voice answers, "Yes, mother." And disturbingly, this threatening presence is wielding a large, razor-sharp butcher's knife, and we see that they have a tattoo in their arm of a cross with a circle around it. The infamous symbol of the Zodiac Killer. But that's where we leave things for now, transitioning from an ominous doom to a hardline misery, as we pick back up with Agent Rule, who's being tortured. A surgical blade slowly carves through Rule's skin as a sneering voice mocks him, claiming to have delighted in personally watching his son die. The villain confirms that Nathan Rule had been turned into what amounts to be a mind-controlled suicide bomber, and he blew himself up so unceremoniously next to a random colonel during the Tet Offensive. Agent Rule spits at his tormentors, and through his clenched teeth, he tells them to go fuck themselves. And so we see that it is, of course, the mad scientist, Dr. Morneau, accompanied by his close assistant, a woman named Lee. Through his agonizing pain, Rule tells the doctor that the war's over, and the twisted man derisively laughs. He replies that a dead American president may have thought so, but no, this is his war, and it's not over yet. Morneau elaborates, declaring that he doesn't give a shit about the Cold War or about capitalism versus communism. Everything he's done, everyone he's aligned with, and every step he's taken, it was all for revenge and nothing more. Agent Rule shakes his head, and he calls the scientist an amoral freak with a god complex, but Morneau isn't listening. The man is absent-mindedly staring at a picture of a young woman and monologuing to himself. He caresses the photo and rambles that he and this girl were engaged once, set up in an arranged marriage by their parents. The scientist then recounts how they became separated when he went to medical school in Europe and the US, while she stayed behind in Vietnam. But Morneau's voice trails off there, and after a pause, he sharply orders Lee to clean Agent Rule's wounds so he doesn't get an infection and die. And with that, the doctor glibly waves the agent a goodbye before he walks off to attend to his other business. After he leaves and the coast is clear, Rule clears his throat, stares Lee dead in the eyes, and asks why the CIA lost contact with her. You see, as it turns out, Dr. Morneau's number 2 here is actually a CIA double agent who had lost contact with the agency months ago. Lee explains that she was being closely watched, so she had to take measures to dispose of all the communications she had on her for her own safety. And she also apologizes to Rule for having to cut him, but he tells her to forget it and to spill all the intel she has gained on Morneau after shadowing him for so long. Lee takes a deep breath and firmly diagnoses the doctor as a highly unstable and psychologically volatile individual. She states that Morneau's references to that woman from earlier, they weren't just aimless schizo-babble. No, it was kind of actually critical. Because, well, the scientist deeply loved this woman, and he cherished her as his fiancée and his best friend with all his heart. However, their happy union took a dark turn in 1965 during the very first large-scale battle between the US military and the North Vietnamese communists. During that fateful battle, Morneau's fiancée, she was hit in her home by a napalm strike. Her entire family burned alive, but she survived. She was found staggering through the streets, flesh peeling off her body and waving around the charred stumps where her arms used to be, with her face frozen in a permanent scream. When he heard the news, Dr. Morneau immediately flew back home, and when he saw his fiancée like that, something snapped, and from then on, he fully dedicated himself to total war against the United States for what they did to her. He began plotting his revenge, and he contracted himself out for hire to the North Vietnamese forces, experimenting first on captured prisoners of war and transforming them into the abominations designed for suicide missions against the Americans. But the problem was, for the doctor, that his subjects kept dying on him early, frequently unable to survive all the twisted medical operations he subjected them to. But when the dead started coming back to life a week ago, Morneau was inspired, and he interpreted this all as a blessing from God, because he now had in his hands an effective, infinite supply of undead subjects that would not perish under his cruel knife. And so his personal war took on a new character. But the tale doesn't quite end there. No. Morneau had made one last trip to the hospital to see his fiancée, and there he suffocated her with a pillow. And on that distressing note, we make a break, and we head over to that airstrip Yam and company landed on. They all picked up on the zombie infestation there, real quick, and they clean up the area a little bit. But time is of the essence, and they are in a very vulnerable position, so they get to work. Hickok instructs Samson to go look for fuel while he works on repairing the tank, and he then tells Watson to keep watch and cover for him while he's working, and so they decide to leave the shell-shocked Maggie alone in the plane for now. And Yam and Alice are basically covering for Samson, who winds up finding a massive tank of gas in a supply truck. But all that fuel is useless if it's just going to immediately pour out of the plane again. And so on that front, things aren't looking too great. Because, well, as it turns out, the aircraft was actually struck several times, and without the proper welding equipment, it's going to be a real uphill battle to fix this thing. Watson is not exactly enthused to hear this, but his attention is soon redirected elsewhere, because from behind him, Maggie starts whimpering, and soon, the woman, who hasn't said a word since they departed, she completely crashes out. She starts pulling her hair and screaming that she wants to go home over and over again. Watson tries to calm her down, but anything he says only adds fuel to the fire. And critically, because he's checking on Maggie, Watson has, in essence, abandoned his post, And unfortunately, a creeping zombie shambles past Hickok directly into the plane. The creature lets out a guttural sound and lustily reaches out for his shocked victims. Watson howls in fright, but he can barely process the full extent of what's going on before the zombie's head explodes in a loud crack. Watson scrambles to his feet, and he juts his head out the door, only to find a heavily tattooed Vietnamese woman pointing a gun at him. She coldly informs Hickok and Watson that all their equipment is hers now, and she forces them to start moving. And we see that, similarly, Yam, Alice, and Watson are also holed up at gunpoint by another woman. Our heroes huddle together and meekly raise their hands in defeat. The woman with the skull tattoo points at them. She tells them that they'll either cooperate and maybe they'll work for them in heaven, or alternatively, they can go ahead and make trouble and be punished in hell. And so the crew is forced on a grueling expedition along the Vietnamese-Cambodian border. Yam tries to make conversation with this tattooed lady, making some banal comment about the other woman holding them hostage. Tattoo Girl replies that she's her sister, and her name is Dio. And for whatever reason, Yam decides to workshop his stand-up routine by sarcastically wisecracking that with her skull and dragon tattoos, she must be a schoolgirl. The woman bluffly states in reply that she used to be a nun, and she's now a soldier. Yam is pretty surprised to hear this, but the gal is more curious into him, as he dresses like an American, but he's Asian like her. Yam is about to hit her with the, "Yeah, I get that a lot," but Alice pops in between them. The nurse casts a side-eye glance at the lady and criticizes Yam for talking to her. He gets defensive and protests that he doesn't even know her name, and to this, the tattooed girl smirks and says that her name is Bien. Bien wryly remarks that jealousy is unbecoming on a woman before she changes the subject, halting and announcing that they have arrived at their destination. And so everyone looks up in amazement as Bien welcomes them to heaven, a massive jungle base centered around a grand religious statue. And all anyone can do is just stand there, frozen in awe. Meanwhile, 28 miles to the northwest, in Cambodia, we see the bruised and battered Agent Rule being locked away in a small underground cell. And watching this through a high-caliber camera is Norman Sellers, who, along with Nero, must have followed Rule's trail. Sellers vows to rescue the agent, but as he tells the warrior dog, it's going to take some time to scope out the compound and to come up with a plan. Because, for one thing, he's not a professional tactician. He's kind of just a normal camera guy. And for another, the place is swarming with more of those frightening Frankenstein zombies. So delicacy is of the essence. And so the issue ends grimly, with Agent Rule trying to keep his spirits up and hoping that he won't be down here for too long. And there he sits, in the damp dark, choking down his worm-infested meal, thinking about how he's going to break free any moment now. And as he consoles himself, we see that he happens to have been placed in the same cell his son Nathan once was, as evidenced by the etchings in the wall, which solemnly read, "I'm sorry, Dad." And with that, the scene fades to a haunting black. And that takes us now to the final issue of the Rule of War miniseries. Sorry for the breakup here, but there is a pretty significant time jump, and I had to put a narrative break in there to reflect that somehow. Anyway, so the issue opens with a flash cut sequence depicting a dead Viet Cong militant, Nero tied to a tree, and a cloaked figure speed walking through a base with their head down. It's Sellers, who has snuck in wearing authentic Vietnamese garb. Also, it looks like he taped the skin at the corner of his eyes back to look, Asian. I'm pretty sure James Bond did the same thing once. Whatever the case, Sellers is moving pretty quick now, because, finally, for the first time since he's been held prisoner, Agent Rule has been lifted out of his cell, and he looks terrible. Rule weakly looks up at the laughing Dr. Morneau, and he demands to know how long he's been locked away for. The doctor gleefully answers that today is April 1st, and he's been down there a glorious 5 weeks. Agent Rule is speechless, and he offers no resistance as he's dragged into the room he was tortured in just weeks ago. Morneau cackles and eagerly urges Rule to gaze upon the state of their mutual friend. Rule lets out a cry when he sees the haunting visage of Lee, who has been strung up and disemboweled. The mad doctor announces that she died painfully, and now she's just another mindless undead monster. Further, Morneau claims to have known the entire time that Lee was a CIA double agent. But none of that matters now, because the scientist has spent the last month and a half mass-producing a record number of remote-controlled super zombies for the NFA to flood South Vietnam with. In his eyes, the imminent extermination of the Republic of Vietnam and all the American forces therein will finally end the war and bring him the justice he so deeply covets. But Morneau's speech is interrupted by a shadowed figure announcing that there is an emergency. It's Sellers, who, with his head down, fibs that the zombie experiments have escaped. The doctor is not buying that a random Viet Cong guard would have this good a grasp of the English language, so he immediately orders the other men in the room to kill him. So yeah, the jig is up, and Sellers just starts blasting his gun in a panic, striking down both of the real guards. Rule takes advantage of the chaos, breaking free and pulling out the sharpened piece of wood his son used to chisel into the wall. The agent tells Sellers that Morneau is his to kill, but the doctor shouts back that that's not going to happen, and he hurls a medical blade at our heroes. Sadly, it lodges itself into Sellers' neck, and he collapses onto the floor. In a rage, Rule impales Morneau in the soldier with his shank. The doctor yelps in pain and falls onto the ground, where he picks up Sellers' dropped weapon. And as for Sellers, well, sadly, Lee is slowly eating him alive, and there's nothing Rule can do about it. Morneau has him at gunpoint, and it appears that the zombie cyborgs really did get loose, as they are savagely killing all the guards around them. The doctor is rather indifferent, though. Panting, Morneau snarls that while he originally planned to keep Rule alive in order to transform him into a suicide bomber like his son, now, instead, he's going to shoot the agent in the heart and turn his zombified form into another drone. However, as the mad scientist raves, he fails to notice a shape in the background charging toward him. It's the ever-brave canine Nero, who wasn't gonna just sit this one out and so freed himself. The dog opens his jaws wide, and he lunges at Morneau, sinking his teeth into the man's arm and straight up ripping it off. Rule dives for the gun and starts firing at all the Viet Cong and undead enemies around him as the chaotic scene fades to black. And from there we make kind of an awkward transition back to New Jersey in order to briefly check back in on Yam's parents, Joe and Faye. Yeah, it's been a while now, and the two have settled on Pitt Island. Not comfortably, but they manage. They're vegetarians, you see, and the commune mainly and regularly eats this exotic-looking meat pretty much every day. The couple they came in with is adamant that it's just pork and incredibly delicious and packed with protein, but Yam's parents aren't interested and they don't go for it. The two are also pretty unsettled by this uncanny screaming sound that randomly emanates from the slaughterhouse every couple days. Ardelia Brower, the strange leader of the island, is making the rounds and hears this conversation. She assures everyone at the table that that's just a sound that the pigs make, and it just takes some time to get used to. Ardelia promises that the butcher, her son Kenny, he won't settle for anything less than perfection. And as the former actress walks away, she casually informs them that Grandy, the ponytail guy who sailed them here, he told her to tell them that he was leaving the island. So Ardelia tells them that he left early in the morning, but don't worry, she's sure he'll be back. And so the sequence ends with us cutting to the slaughterhouse, where her son Kenny looms over a dismembered Grandy, who has various limbs hanging from meat hooks. The butcher is absolutely massive, and he has this gross matted hair, and he's wearing tattered clothing decorated with the Zodiac Killer symbol. The freak chatters to himself, oafishly remarking that Grandy threatened Ardelia's babies. And he also proudly brags that he's a quicker butcher than his brother Ronnie on the West Coast. So, needless to say, Joe and Faye are in immense and immediate danger. But I'm afraid that is a story for another day. For now, we return to Cambodia, where Sellers lies slumped over with a bullet in his head. Nero stands by him, whining sadly, unable to understand what happened to his friend and why he's no longer moving. Agent Rule sympathizes. Sellers was a good man who deserved better, and the agent is forever indebted to him for saving his life. But as for now, Rule is busy with other things. He wields a bloody hacksaw and tosses severed limbs over his shoulder like they're nothing. He announces that it's go time, and so we see the art project he's been working on. It's Dr. Morneau, with both sets of arms and legs hacked off. Rule dangles him out over his creations like Simba, and the villain writhes around ineffectually in terror. He desperately begs for mercy, but Rule shouts that even in war, there are rules. He looks the scientist dead in the eyes and coldly remarks that the inhuman doctor broke all of them. And so, Rule tosses the stubby Morneau into the growling pit of monsters. And as a final play, the agent cranks the remote control dial to the absolute max setting, sending the zombies into a feral frenzy. And, well, as you can see, there are some things that simply defy description. Agent Rule and Nero sprint away as fast as they can as the electricity surges through the zombies. The creatures' eyes bulge out of their sockets, and their heads begin to bubble. And soon enough, their skulls begin popping like balloons. And it all culminates in one thunderous explosion. Rule has finally avenged his son, but it was costly, and Sellers died, and he still feels this dull emptiness yet inside him. But for now, he passes out from sheer exhaustion, and he lays there helplessly when we see two pairs of boots approach him. We cut to a few hours later, and we see the recovering agent recounting the entire story to Chief Petty Officer Tremaine of all people. Apparently they are at the Heaven base, and apparently Tremaine is one of the two men who found Rule and brought him here. So we also see Private Yem as well, who is joyfully embracing Nero, who he thought he'd never see again after the whole Firebase Ares fiasco way back when. He also has a buzz cut and a large tattoo of a bird running across his face. Hey, good luck getting a job now, dumbass. Anyway, Alice teases Yam for the tat, and she is self-evidently still kind of jealous because Bien is the one who gave it to him, and because they spend a lot of time together. But regardless, Yam shares his story with Agent Rule and explains the backstory of the base they are on. It was originally just a regular convent until one day the Viet Cong rolled in and forcefully made soldiers and snipers out of the women who resided there. And when the apocalypse began, they decided to lock down at this location. And the Heaven base naturally became enlarged over time because they picked up stranded American military personnel and added them to their ranks. But that is enough of all that for now. It's time to meet the other individual who saved Rule and carried him into the base. At present, Bien flirtatiously shimmies up to this mysterious figure, and she hits him with the,
"You're different."
She is incredibly intrigued by the figure, as no one has seen his face and no one yet knows his name. And the man finally turns around, and his identity is revealed. It's Jungle Jim, the elite combatant formerly known as Brian Curliss, who is famed across Southeast Asia for his legendary exploits. He shuts down Bien's advances, though, telling her his name's on the helmet, and to quiet down because right now he's trying to keep watch, because when he and Chief Tremaine brought Agent Rule into the base, they were actually running from something. Jungle Jim declares that out there somewhere is an undead shitstorm, and so the gas mask-wearing warrior returns to his observation post, keeping watch for some kind of lurking evil. A storm he knows is coming any day now. And so the miniseries ends deep in the jungles, where the demented Warface is commanding a massive army of the undead, leading his trained zombies on a crusade that he promises is going to be absolutely glorious. And thus so concludes the insane story of 68, Rule of War. Kowalski, analysis... Oh, shit. Wait. Oh yeah, we still have to cover the 68 Jungle Jim Guts and Glory one-shot from 2015. How could I forget? Right, so this one-shot explains the events leading up to Jungle Jim meeting Chief Tremaine and ultimately finding Agent Rule. For the continuity heads, this story takes place 2 days before the Rule of War finale, and about 1 day after his adventures in the Jungle Jim video. So, yeah, kind of a busy week for the guy. Our story opens on March 30th, 1968, in North Vietnam. We see a stripped-down woman, sobbing, begging not to be killed. But her cries have no currency here, and her throat is slit mercilessly. The men responsible chuckle amongst themselves, but someone is watching. From the shadows behind them, a figure swings wide, 2 machetes together, cleanly slicing through 4 men's necks like it's Fruit Ninja. It is the unrelenting and dynamic Jungle Jim. He appears to be sporting some kind of camouflage variant of his iconic outfit, and like I said, he's still missing his helmet after the events of last volume. In any case, Jim quickly notes that the men he just killed are actually not Viet Cong or NVA. They're Cambodians. They're Khmer Rouge, aka forces of the genocidal communist regime in Cambodia. It's uncertain what they're doing in North Vietnam, as they did not have the greatest parity with the parties there, but Jungle Jim ascertains that they have just murdered some American college kids who were in the Peace Corps. And while it's true that these kids were naive to ever come here in the first place, and realpolitik was utterly unknown to them, but their hearts were in the right place, and they didn't deserve to die like that. And Jungle Jim is running low on ammo at the moment, So he kneels down, and he jams his large blade into the bases of their skulls, severing their brain stems and saving them from an even more undignified fate as a member of the Walking Undead. Jim picks up one of the student's bags, but before he can take a look inside, his vision starts shaking, and he gets very woozy as everything around him starts distorting. But just as randomly as it started, it suddenly stops, and Jim's attention is refocused to a loud scream coming from his right. He looks up in total disbelief to see a shrieking woman sprinting away from a pack of hungry zombies. Jungle Jim immediately pushes her to the side and starts literally cutting through the beasts. But as he dispatches of them, he observes that they're not really that interested in the girl for some reason. But for Jim, a zombie's a zombie, so he really don't got time to think about that shit. And so he continues his Mortal Kombat onslaught, executing the beasts until he's at last victorious. Jungle Jim tries to catch his breath, and he asks the girl if she is alright, but the woman doesn't respond. And mere moments later, to her left, lumbers out this massive zombie with a large, fully stocked automatic weapon. Our hero immediately dives for cover, right as the big boy groans and starts lethargically shooting at him. Jim hides behind a tree. The woman, meanwhile, just stands there passively, next to the brute like some kind of NPC. But soon enough the zombie's gun clicks, and it's too stupid to figure out how to recalibrate it. So Jungle Jim seizes the window of opportunity, and he returns fire. However, all of the warrior's shots are non-critical, and they miss the brain. And what's worse, Jim's own gun jams, and he realizes he's absolutely fucked. The zombie lets out a primal roar and slams its gun down on Jim's head, knocking him flat. The monster then pounces on him, savagely biting at Jungle Jim and tearing right through one of his bamboo forearm guards. Our hero fumbles around for anything he can grab onto, and his fingers grace around a frag grenade, which he jams into the zombie's gaping mouth before kicking it back and nosediving away from the subsequent explosion. Afterward, Jungle Jim tears his mask off and inhales the fresh air. The woman over his shoulder apologizes for not doing anything to help, but Jim tells her it's okay. And so we get a good close look at her, and she appears to be a regular all-American girl, wearing a bottle cap necklace and looking more well put together than the situation would probably warrant. She tells Jim that her name is Glory, and as soon as he hears that, he becomes debilitatingly dizzy again, and reality starts distorting around him. Man, I hate when that happens. Anyway, Jim gets his head on straight, and he tells Glory that that's the second time that's happened to him. He then remembers the bag from before, and Glory vaguely asserts that whatever's inside is probably really important, and they should take it with them. But when Jim turns around to ask what the fuck she's talking about, the gal has completely disappeared without a trace. So Jungle Jim starts aimlessly wandering through the jungle. He picked up that dead zombie's helmet, by the way, and he's fastened it into a replacement for the one he left behind at Sergeant Asher's grave. Anyway, right now he's engaged in an intense DID conversation with Brian Curlis, the voice/personality in his head, who reminds Jungle Jim that he is in fact Brian Curlis. But Jim tells him that's all nonsense because he saw Brian die in that chicken coop. Jungle Jim then tells Brian to shut up because he's trying to concentrate, and the Marine mocks him for trying to follow the conveniently non-existent trail of a suspicious civilian girl in the jungle. And Brian's about to rip the band-aid off and declare that she is not real, but the assertion is immediately undermined when Glory pops up behind a tree, waving at Jim. And so the two camp out together for the night. Jim offers her some food, but Glory replies that she doesn't really get hungry that often. She peers inquisitively at Jim and asks where he's from. Jim stammers out that Brian's from Montana, and when Glory asks who that is, Jim simply replies that it's someone who died. The woman remarks that he doesn't sound so sure, and Jim immediately changes the subject, asking her where they're going. Glory cryptically answers that they're heading to an emptiness, and that the warrior can help her fill it up. And so the next morning, the two hike for miles and miles, but at a grassy hill, Brian warns Jim that something's wrong, and before he can react, a slobbering zombie gets the jump on him, pinning our man down and chomping at his body. But just when all hope seems lost, a stranger pulls the zombie off of Jim and suddenly decapitates it with no fanfare. It's Chief Tremaine, who tells Jungle Jim to keep quiet because there's trouble nearby. The pair crouch in the grass, observing a Khmer Rouge camp, and Jim exclaims that this must be the site Glory was talking about. The chief has no idea who the guy's referencing, and he's even more confused when Jim describes the blonde woman who apparently led him there, but who has obviously disappeared. Whatever the case, the two men talk some more and make proper introductions, and Chief Tremaine suggests that with the communist soldiers down there in front of them, and something even worse stalking him, they should probably get a move on and go. But Jungle Jim refuses. He tells Tremaine that the Khmer Rouge killed some young Americans, and he's not going anywhere until they pay for what they've done. The chief grins and is like, "All right then," and so the two get to business. The operation commences exactly 20 minutes later, when on the right flank of the camp, a loose grenade lands in a pot of boiling stew, going off and ripping the nearby enemies into shreds. And simultaneously, on the left side, Chief Tremaine starts shooting down the communists and throwing smoke bombs into the area, clearing the floor for the brunt of the attack. In a direct line through the middle of the camp, Jungle Jim charges like a maniac, guns blazing. The chief, being one of the few who has ever seen the warrior in his full glory and lived to tell the tale, is simply astounded beyond words. Jungle Jim floats through the battlefield, each movement fluidly following from the previous, as graceful and precise as some philosopher's syllogism. And in the blink of an eye, it's all over, and Jim and Tremaine are victorious. The two poke around the smoking camp, and Jim is surprised to see Glory, who leads him to the flagpole at the center before she disappears again. Jim shakes his head, but he nonetheless knows what he must do next. And so he takes down the National Movement flag, and he proudly replaces it with a beautiful American one he pulls out of the Peace Corps bag without looking. As for Tremaine, well, he finds a rotting pile of bodies, and he tells Jim that it's too late and they can't be helped, but they did a good thing today. And so the one-shot ends with the American flag flapping in the peaceful wind as the two recede into the distance, on the path again for the next venture. However, we see that in the camp lies several long-deceased corpses, and among them is one female, with a few strands of tattered blonde hair left. A female who is wearing a bottle cap necklace. And on that ponderous note, we conclude the 68 Jungle Jim one-shot.
Kowalski, analysis.
Well, that was the next installment of 68. What did you think of today's bombastic story? Make sure to share your thoughts and reactions in the comment section down below. I also need your opinion on something. Should we jump straight into the finale next video, or should we first detour into the standalone one-shots? They are set in the same universe, but they don't connect directly to the, current main arc. That said, some characters do make brief cameos in the finale. I know we've been at this series for a while now, so I don't know. Please do tell me your opinions on the matter, and I will plan accordingly. The choice is yours, truly. So yeah, I guess I'll do some analysis stuff now. I'll try to keep it brief, as this video is already way longer than I had anticipated. But I'll begin by letting you guys know that I did heavily edit today's storyline. You see, sometimes people watch my videos, and then they will go read the comic, and become really upset when they discover that I had rearranged and combined certain scenes and sequences. And that's not really something I hide, but when people discover it, they accuse me of these, nefarious schemes for some reason. But come on. I'm sorry, but a monthly comic does not always neatly translate into a YouTube video format. So, just to be clear, guys, these videos are stylized retellings. And if you are interested in the story, I would highly recommend you check out the original. Okay, so now that we're done with the housekeeping stuff, I'll make some light remarks about today's storyline itself. To begin, I'll note that the comic series has become pretty messy, and the problems of advancing 4 different storylines at the same time in the same book are readily becoming apparent. There's just way too much going on, and there's not enough space to give each character or arc enough room to fairly breathe and develop. Hey guys, it's Juan for a little post-edit insert. So, I saw that the 68 creators have been shouting out my videos on their Facebook page, and I think that's pretty cool. I recognize now it's a little bit awkward for any criticisms that I levied, but if they're watching this, I love the series, okay? They have a compendium or a thick book that collects the entire series that I believe is coming out in October, so go make sure to buy that, okay? Sorry, back to the analysis. Thank you. I know this stuff is a decade old, but I kind of wonder if it would have been better to split the cast into 2 or more separate books that would later converge later on, instead of incrementally trying to move them all up at the same time. I imagine this video is probably straight up incomprehensible to a new viewer. And I'm not hating on the creators or anything, don't get me wrong. I'm just a realist, okay? And I could be wrong. And any shortcomings in presentation could ultimately be on me. I also do understand that the author, Mark Kidwell, purposefully plots this way. In a 2015 interview with Horror News Network, he said as following that consistency, I think, comes from individual style, and all the 68 books are very much written in my own preferred style of storytelling. I tend toward the cinematic when I write comics, thus the quick cuts between branching story elements and action. I like to lead the reader to certain tipping points in given scenarios, then jump to an altogether different branch of the larger 68 narrative. That way, you keep readers off their footing, keep them wondering what to expect and when to expect it with each page turn. And that's a bold and interesting approach. And if it works, I guess. After all, it did bring us Jungle Jim. However, it also, at the same time, brought us the finale, which I already know will be controversial, but whatever. We'll cross that river when we get there, I guess. Anyway, also of note, in that same interview, Kidwell is asked, what he thinks makes Jungle Jim such a popular and beloved character. And he responds that, I think there's something to the whole schism between the gas mask and its wearer. I've had fans go on and on at shows about the whole Jekyll and Hyde aspect to Jungle Jim. The way he becomes human, tired, scared, sick when the mask comes off. And then how cool it is that as soon as the mask is in place again, he's a revved up killing machine. I think Jim in his situation lets readers imagine what it might take in a wartime situation, zombies or no zombies, to transform into what you'd need to be to survive. A very fine thesis indeed, and I don't really have anything meaningful to add to it. I already said a lot of what I needed to about the subject last video. Basically, I just thought it would be cool to have the author's own views. on the record here as well. Anyway, a final thing I'll comment on is the historical accuracy, or perhaps the lack thereof. Yeah, essentially I was forewarned ahead of time about things like the inclusion of the Khmer Rouge and their less than consanguineous relationship with the Vietnamese, so to speak. And I confess to be lacking in much of that detailed knowledge regarding that particular subject, so I'm only able to remain curious as to if that sort of thing disturbs your own immersion in the story, or if you just roll with it along with all the other zombie stuff. Another thing people have mentioned is the apparently lackluster Vietnamese dialect and language deployed throughout the series. That is to say, perhaps poor translations. And I don't really mean to impugn the creators in any real sense. They're all humans like the rest of us. I just try to remain fair, even if it wins me no friends in the end. But yeah, I guess that about does it for today's video. If you're still here, I've got to extend a big thank you for sticking around so long. It's crazy times, I tell you, crazy times. But I'll see you next time. So for now, I will thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good one.